You've lived. You've been through things that have changed you, maybe even things that felt like hell and back. And somehow you survived. You're here. And when you've lived through those things, I know people want to say things like, everything happens for a reason, or one day you're going to find the purpose in it. No, I don't believe that. Sometimes those notions can feel actually more painful and they're not helpful. Like there has to be some reason for it, or as if there's the only way that we can make sense of it. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there is a purpose for the pain, but I do believe that we can turn our pain into purpose. And those are two very different things. Finding purpose in your pain suggests that it happened for your growth or some grand plan behind it, or for some reason that it had to hurt that way for you to learn your lesson. And for a lot of people, that framing doesn't feel peaceful, or it definitely doesn't help. It just adds another layer of weight. But turning pain into purpose is different. It doesn't ask you to justify the hurt or find a silver lining in it. It just simply acknowledges that, yes, the pain is real and that something meaningful can still grow from it. We can take what we've lived through, even the hardest, most painful parts, and allow it to shape how we show up in the world and how we contribute to it. Not by bypassing our grief, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by allowing what we lived through to grow with us and from us, and sometimes even guide us toward a more meaningful and purposeful life. And that's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to share 5 ways that I've done that in my own life and ways you can begin to do that in yours too. But before I do, hi, I'm Destiny Rael. I'm a trauma-informed life and grief coach. And this is the work that I do now. Everything that I create, including this very channel, has been born through my own pain. The tragic loss of my brother, my childhood traumas, divorce, and many other challenges I've walked through, and even the work with my clients. I've learned that many of the things that once caused us our deepest pain can also be the very thing that shapes us and how we show up in the world. So if you've lived through something difficult or you're going through something really painful right now, I'm going to share 5 ways that pain can begin to transform into purpose. So the first way is to share your story. One of the most powerful things we can do with our experiences is simply talk about them honestly. Because when someone hears our own pain reflected in another person's story, something starts to shift. They realize that they're not the only one. They realize someone else has walked through something similar and survived it. And that alone can bring comfort and courage and hope. Research actually backs this up. Studies on narrative sharing and grief processing showing that telling our story and having it witnessed reduces feelings of isolation and helps regulate our emotions, and can even support post-traumatic growth. There's something deeply healing about being heard. And I see this firsthand as a grief support leader and a group facilitator. I've sat in rooms and witnessed something really remarkable happen when one person gets honest about their pain. It creates permission. Suddenly others start to feel safe enough to simply just say, me too. And that exchange alone, that moment of recognition, can be profoundly healing for everyone in the room. Sharing your story can be incredibly healing for you too. Every time you tell it, every time you process it in a new way, you begin to see new meaning and maybe new understanding, and even sometimes discover things in you that you didn't even know were there. And here's the thing. This doesn't have to mean that you create a TED Talk or, go in a public forum, although maybe one day you will. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can start in a much smaller way, a conversation with a coworker, or maybe just a moment of honesty with your neighbor, even an exchange with a stranger who needed to hear exactly what you had to say. Sharing your story can happen anywhere, even in the random, ordinary moments, and it can still change someone's life, including yours. Your story doesn't just have to be something that happened to you. It can become something that can help someone else keep going. And of course, there's no rush to this or a timeline, only when you're ready. But when that moment comes, just know that your story matters, your voice matters, your pain and your experience matter. So I want to leave you with something to sit with. What part of your story do you feel ready to share? What have you been carrying alone that someone else might need to hear today? Because as we move into the next pathway that I'm about to share, it builds on this one. Sharing your story is absolutely powerful, but sometimes before we can even share it, we have to understand it. And that brings us to the number 2, reflect and learn. Pain has a way of forcing us to pause and really look at our life in a very different way. It can change our perspective, it reshapes what matters to us, and even reveal things about us we didn't even know we had. But here's the thing, that doesn't always happen automatically. It happens when we choose to get curious about what we've been through instead of just trying to survive it or outrun it. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that people who intentionally reflect on their painful experiences, the ones who ask, what do I know now that I didn't know before? Or what did I discover about myself through all this? Or how has this changed me? Are more likely to find meaning, experience personal growth, and even move forward with greater clarity and purpose. Reflection isn't just about looking backwards. It's actually how we can start to build the road forward. So when we take our time to really reflect on our painful experiences, we often begin to see what slowly grew inside of us through them. Not because the pain's necessary, but because we're stronger than it, and because surviving it required us to grow. And I have seen this in my own life. Some of the qualities that I rely on, that I value most now, is my empathy and ability to sit with someone in the darkest moments of their life, my understanding of grief and trauma. None of that came from my easiest moments. It definitely came from the hardest seasons of my life. And maybe for you, it's made you more compassionate or patient or resilient or more aware of it truly matters. And those insights don't just stay inside you. They become the wisdom that shapes how you show up in your relationships and your work and the choices that you make about your life. That's purposeful. That's your pain becoming something. So before we move on to the third way, I just want you to sit with this. How has the pain you've experienced shaped you? And how is that showing up in your life today, even in ways that you might not have noticed yet? Because sometimes the growth is already happening. We just haven't stopped long enough to see it. And so now the third way is to give and to grow. Some of the most powerful moments in the world were born from someone else's personal pain. Mothers Against Drunk Driving was started by a mother who lost her daughter. The suicide prevention movement has largely been led by those who've lost someone to it. People who struggle with addiction now mentor others in recovery. And so many other causes that have changed the world began the same way. Survivors of trauma become the most powerful advocates of healing. And I know because I have lived that. It's why I do the work that I do now. And research supports this too. Studies on meaning making after loss show that one of the most common ways to healing and growth is what researchers call pro-social behavior, giving back, advocating, showing up for others in ways that are directly connected to what we've been through. It's as if the experience cracks us open in a way that makes us more aware of the world around us and more compelled to do something about it and make a difference. Pain can awaken something deep in us, a deeper sense of empathy and purpose. It can make us care about things that maybe we never paid attention to before. It can lead us to educate, to volunteer, to mentor, advocate, speak up, or just create a real change and make a real difference. And this doesn't have to mean that you start your own foundation or launch a movement of your own. It can be as simple as checking in on someone that you know is struggling because you know what that feels like. It might be volunteering one afternoon a month, or it might be speaking up in a conversation where you once might have stayed silent. The seeds of transformation are often planted in the very places where you once struggled the most. So I want to invite you to sit with this too for a moment. What do you care about now that maybe you didn't before? Is there something stirring in you, something you feel called towards because of what you've lived through? Maybe that stirring is worth paying attention to. Maybe it's signaling something that is wanting to grow in you. And so this brings me to the next pathway, which is the fourth one, to create and connect. Sometimes pain lives in places that words can't fully express. You can know it intellectually that you're grieving or you've been through something. You can talk about it and process it and understand it. And yet still there feels like something you just haven't touched yet. Like there's a part of the experience that language just doesn't have the words for. And that's where creativity comes in. It gives those emotions voice and expression. Writing and music and painting and art and movement and gardening. And these are just to name a few. And these aren't just hobbies. These are ways of processing of what we're carrying and releasing what we're holding on to. Think about your favorite song that speaks directly to your pain, or that poem that gives words to something you couldn't say yourself, or a movie that captured exactly what you've lived through. And you've just sat there bawling your eyes out or feeling both wrecked and relieved at the same time because someone finally got it. That's creativity doing what words sometimes can't. And creativity can also become a source of connection and community. I mean, think about how many people bond over the same song or the same book or the same film, or how art movements or writing groups or music or dance, I mean, these things bring people together around a shared feeling and a shared experience. You know, there's something about creative expression that just speaks a universal language. It can draw people towards you and towards each other in a way that is completely unique to that particular creative outlet. And that's actually one of the reasons why I created my workshop called Color Your Soul, because I know firsthand how much can surface and come up through creativity that never can come through words. And the Color Your Soul is a guided experience that helps people explore their emotions and healing through art and reflection, and we do it together. And you don't have to be an artist. It's not about perfection. It's just really about expression. So I'll leave a link in the description if that's something you'd want to learn more about. But I want to leave you with this before we move to the next one. What would it be like to express what you've been carrying, not in words, but in another way entirely? Is there a creative outlet that has been calling you, or maybe that you've been ignoring? Maybe that too needs a little paying attention to. Because when we create, when we express, when we connect, something also tends to happen. We start asking the bigger questions that go way beyond the pain itself. Questions about meaning, questions about purpose, about who we really are at our core. And that brings us to the fifth and final way, soul and spirit. You know, painful experiences have a way of becoming an unexpected invitation to explore our spiritual life more deeply. It's like a soul initiation to reconnect to deeper parts of ourselves, or even a higher and greater power. You know, it invites us to question what we believe now, to really start listening closely to that voice inside of us that maybe we've been too busy to hear. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, pain becomes the very thing that cracks us open to the bigger questions of life. Not just why did this happen or why I'm here, but more like what truly matters. How do I want to live? Who am I becoming? And those questions change everything, because when the hardest seasons of our lives strip away the noise and the distractions and the busyness of all of life, we're often left with something essential. It's a real clear sense of who we are underneath it all, what you value now, what you can no longer pretend doesn't matter to you. And that clarity can actually become your North Star. It becomes your compass. It makes you more intentional about how you spend your time or your life, or who you give your energy to, what you say yes to, what you say no to. And that is living deliberately. That's living from the inside out. That's living purpose at a very deep level. Not purpose that you go out and find, not a purpose of something you do, not even something that you have to create, but something you become. Something that you live as a result of what you've been through. And sometimes that shows up in ways that you never expected. You know, maybe you find yourself longing to go back to school, or leaving a relationship that no longer aligns with who you've become, or finally quitting a job and stepping towards something that actually means something to you, or you've always had a passion for. You know, these changes can be big and life-altering even, or sometimes they're small. Because when pain shifts something at the very core, the life around you often has to shift too. So I want to leave you with one final reflection. What deeper questions has your experience opened up in you? And are you giving yourself the space to actually sit with them? Because sometimes pain doesn't just change what we do with our lives. It changes everything inside of us. It changes the entire way we understand why we're here. And that alone can guide us forward. So if you're walking through something painful right now, I just want you to know that you don't have to rush to find purpose in it all. Healing takes time. Grief takes time. Understanding takes time, and processing. And you're allowed to just be in it for a while. But when you're ready, and only when you're ready, know that what you've lived through doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can become part of how you show up in the world, part of how you connect to others, part of what you create and what you give and who you become. You bring your grief with you. You integrate it into your life forward. Your pain was not the purpose, but you, all of you, everything you've lived through, you are. And if you want support in any of this or in the process, I'd love to walk alongside of you. I work with people all the time, and I have my one-on-one sunset to sunrise coaching journey, and it's a private space where we just do this deep work together. So if that feels like something that you'd want to explore or you're ready for, I would love to connect with you. So you can schedule a free call with me. I'll leave that link below. Or if you're not ready for that and you're curious about exploring your own creativity, my Color Your Soul workshop might be also a place to start. So I'll leave that in the link below as well. And if this resonated with you, I would just love for you to stay connected here. This is the channel where I talk about grief and life transitions and the deeper questions that come when life changes us and even rebuilding our lives. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to be exploring some of those things that we carry mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and how learning to release some of that weight can just help us move forward and with more clarity and more intention. So if that's something you're curious about, make sure you're subscribed and stay with me, and I will see you in the next video. And thank you so much for being here.